They said my stepfather built everything from scratch, that he was a self-made man, that the company existed because of his vision, his sacrifice, his blood. They said it at his retirement party, at family dinners, at every holiday gathering, where I sat the far end of the table with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. What they never said, what no one ever corrected, was that my mother built it with him, that her inheritance, her father's land, her name on the original lease, was the reason there was anything to build on at all. And when she died, they let me believe I was imagining things. I was 26 when I first found the folder. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. Because the way my stepfather told it later, to my half-brother, to his attorney, to anyone who would listen, he made it sound like I had gone looking for something to destroy. I hadn't. I was in the basement of the main house, helping my half-brother's wife pack up some of my mother's things that had been sitting in storage for 3 years since the funeral. 3 years. Her china was down there, in newspaper. Her wedding photo, the first one, from her marriage to my biological father, was wrapped in a plastic bag and shoved behind a water heater. I was the one who found it. I was the one who cried over it alone in that basement while she called upstairs asking if I wanted sweet tea. The folder was inside a filing cabinet my mother used to keep in her home office. The cabinet had been moved downstairs at some point, I didn't know when. I opened the top drawer looking for a label maker my half-brother's wife thought might be in there, and instead I found a hanging file labelled with my name, my full name, my legal name that I hadn't gone by since I was 19. I almost closed the drawer. I don't know why I didn't. Something made me pull the folder out. Inside was a life insurance policy. My name was the insured. My stepfather was the sole beneficiary. The policy had been taken out 4 months before my mother died, when she was already sick, when we were all supposedly pulling together as a family. The coverage amount was $750,000. The cause of coverage, listed under the accidental death rider was, and I had to read it 3 times to understand what I was seeing, workplace injury resulting in death. I worked for the company, had worked there since I was 22, fresh out of college, because my mother asked me to, because she said it would be good to keep things in the family, because she trusted my stepfather and she wanted me close to the business she'd helped build. My official title was Operations Coordinator. Unofficially, I ran the logistics side of 2 regional warehouses. I knew the inventory systems, the vendor contracts, the staffing schedules. I had keys to both facilities, and apparently someone had decided that made me a good candidate for an accidental workplace fatality. I stood in that basement for a long time. My half-brother's wife called down again asking about the sweetie tea, and I said, yes please, and I tucked the folder under my arm, and I walked upstairs like nothing had happened. That night I drove back to my apartment, and I sat on my kitchen floor with the folder in my lap, and I called my best friend from college. She answered on the second ring, because she always answers on the second ring. She says the first ring is for composure. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, call an attorney before you do anything else. Not a family friend, not anyone connected to the company, a stranger. I want to tell you that I was calm. I was not calm. I was shaking so hard I had to put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter to finish the conversation. But I wrote down what she said. Call an attorney, document everything, do not confront anyone, do not tell anyone in the family. I didn't sleep that night. I should back up, because the insurance policy didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a family that had been quietly, methodically making me smaller for years, and I had let it happen because I loved my mother, and I thought love was supposed to mean you stayed. My mother married my stepfather when I was 11. He was fine, in the way that word means nothing. He wasn't cruel to me. He wasn't warm either. I was an inconvenience he had agreed to, a condition of the marriage, a child who belonged to another man's name. He had a son from his previous marriage, my half-brother, who was 8 when they got together. We were never close. He tolerated me the way you tolerate bad weather, with resignation, without conversation. What changed was when my mother's father died and left her the land. My grandfather owned 32 acres in central Virginia, and when he passed, he left everything to my mother. The land, the equipment lease, the small commercial building on the property that had been renting to a landscaping company for $11 a square foot since the late 90s. My stepfather had his own small construction business at that point, doing residential work, nothing spectacular. But that land, that commercial building, was the foundation for what became Sterling Ridge Site Services. Grading, excavation, land clearing, mid-sized contracts, mostly state and county work. By the time I graduated college, the company was doing around $4 million a year in revenue. My mother's name was on nothing. That was the deal they had made. She told me once, offhand in the kitchen, while she was cutting up a cantaloupe. She said it so casually, like it was simply a fact of geography. She said my stepfather had handled all the business formation, and it was just easier to keep things clean, one name on the paperwork. She said it didn't matter because they were married. She said the law protected her. I was 24 when she said that. I was standing at her kitchen counter eating cantaloupe and I didn't push back. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and changed the subject because I didn't know then what I know now, which is that love does not automatically mean protection, and marriage does not automatically mean equity, and the law protects people who can prove what they're owed. My mother got sick the following spring, pancreatic cancer caught late, the way it usually is. She went from diagnosis to hospice in 14 months. I took a leave from the company for the last 4 of those months to help care for her, and my stepfather was kind during that period in a way that disarmed me. He was present. He drove her to appointments when I couldn't. He sat with her. I remember thinking he loves her. Whatever else is true, he loves her. That mattered to me. After she died, things shifted fast. Not dramatically, not with a confrontation or a declaration, just quietly, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves over the sun. I came back to work and my access badge stopped working for the main office building. IT told me it was a system update. 3 weeks later, my email permissions were reduced. I couldn't access the vendor portal anymore. My half-brother was suddenly in meetings I used to run. Small things. Individually, each one had a reasonable explanation. Together, they told a story. The story was, "You are being removed." I raised it once. I asked my stepfather directly, in his office, what was going on with my role. He looked at me with a kind of practiced patience that I recognized later as contempt and said the company was going through it as restructuring, and every role was being evaluated. He said it was nothing personal. He said my mother would have wanted me to be flexible. He used her name like a tool, like leverage, and I sat across from him and nodded and felt something go cold in my chest. A month after that meeting, they reclassified my position from permanent to contract. No explanation, no HR discussion. Just a new contract on my desk on a Tuesday morning with a lower hourly rate and no benefits and a 90-day termination clause. I signed it because I didn't know what else to do. I signed it because I still, even then, wanted to believe it was something other than what it was. I found the insurance policy 8 weeks after I signed that contract. The attorney I found was a woman named Thornton, first name only on her business card, which I liked because it meant she wasn't trying to charm anyone. She had an office in Charlottesville, and she specialized in estate disputes and employment law, which turned out to be exactly the combination I needed. I emailed her at 11 at night with a summary of what I'd found. She responded at 7 the next morning and asked me to come in. I brought everything. I brought the insurance policy. I brought copies of my original employment contract, the reclassification paperwork, the emails I had saved, all of them, everyone, because I had started saving emails the week after my badge stopped working. Some instinct had kicked in that I didn't have a name for yet. I brought my grandfather's will, which I had a copy of because my mother had kept one in her personal files, and I had taken her personal files home the week after she died, before anyone else thought to ask for them. Thornton read everything without saying a word. She had one of those faces that shows nothing while the gears are running. When she looked up, she asked me 2 questions. She asked whether I had ever signed anything waiving inheritance rights or making any claims on company equity. I said no. She asked whether my mother had a will. I said yes, but it left everything to my stepfather. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "The will is one issue. The insurance policy is another issue entirely." And she explained to me, slowly, clearly, in language that didn't assume I was stupid, that taking out a life insurance policy on an employee without their knowledge or consent, naming yourself as beneficiary, and classifying the coverage under an accidental workplace death rider was not a grey area. It was fraud. Depending on the intent, it could be worse. She asked me if there had been any incidents at work, any near misses, any situations where I had been asked to do something outside my normal duties, something that put me in a physical risk. I thought for a long time. Then, I remembered the roof. 8 months earlier, back when I still had full access, I had been asked to do a physical inventory of roofing materials at one of the storage yards. That wasn't unusual in itself. I did site visits regularly, but the request had come from my half-brother, not from my supervisor. And when I got there, the site foreman seemed surprised to see me. He said he hadn't been told anyone was coming. He showed me to the storage area, which was on an elevated platform accessed by an external metal staircase. The staircase had a loose section at the top landing. I had noticed it, tested my weight carefully, made it up and back fine. I had meant to file a maintenance report and then forgot because something else came up. When I told Thornton about the staircase, something changed in her expression. Not alarm, exactly. More like recognition. She asked me to write down the date, the time, who had sent the request, and who had been present on site. She asked me whether the maintenance request had ever been filed by anyone. I told her I didn't know. She said she would find out. What she found out eventually was that the maintenance request had never been filed. Not by me, not by the foreman, not by anyone. The staircase had been repaired but quietly and with no documentation of why, which meant that either the unsafe condition had simply gone unaddressed until someone got around to it, or the unsafe condition had served a purpose and had been corrected afterward. I want to be careful here. I don't know for certain what the intent was. Thornton told me that establishing intent versus negligence would be a matter for investigation, and that the investigation was not mine to conduct. What I know is what I can document, and what I could document was enough. The first call Thornton made was to the Virginia Bureau of Insurance. Undisclosed life insurance policy on employees, taken out without consent, are a reportable offence. The second call was to an attorney she knew at the U.S. Department of Labor. Because the warehouse facilities had federal contracts, which brought in a different layer of jurisdiction. The third thing she did was send a formal letter to Sterling Ridge Site Services, requesting full employment records, benefits documentation, and any insurance-related filings for all personnel over the past 5 years. My stepfather called me the evening after the letter arrived. I didn't answer. I watched the phone ring, and I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave one. My half-brother called the next morning. I didn't answer that one either. 2 days later, my stepfather's personal attorney called Thornton's office. That was when things started to move in a different direction, because his attorney calling meant they were taking it seriously, which meant Thornton's read of the situation was right. I want to tell you that the next part was fast. It wasn't. It was months of document requests and depositions, and one extremely uncomfortable afternoon when I sat in a conference room and answered questions from 3 different attorneys, while Thornton sat beside me and occasionally put her hand on my arm to signal me to pause before answering. I was calm in that room. I surprised myself. I had read somewhere once that when people ask you questions they're hoping will rattle you, the worst thing you can do for them is get rattled. So I didn't. I answered every question in a flat, even voice, and I looked whoever was speaking directly in the eye, and I did not fill silences with extra words. The investigation by the Bureau of Insurance found 2 things. 1, the policy had been taken out without my knowledge or consent, in violation of Virginia insurance law, specifically the insurable interest requirement as it applies to employer-employee relationships. 2, the policy had been underwritten using falsified employment classifications. My position had been described on the application as a high-risk field operator, which would have made a workplace death both more plausible and more routine. My actual title, operations coordinator, had never appeared on the application at all. Insurance fraud, falsified documents. Those were the findings. The Department of Labor inquiry widened the scope. Because the company held federal contracts, falsified employee classifications created a separate compliance issue that flagged additional review of payroll records, benefits filings, and worker classification documents going back 7 years. What that review found was a pattern. I was not the only employee who had been misclassified. I was simply the only one where the misclassification had been connected to a fraudulent insurance policy. My half-brother's name was on some of the internal communications related to the reclassification. He claimed he had signed what he was told to sign and didn't know the specifics. That may or may not have been true. It wasn't my job to decide. My stepfather's attorney negotiated a civil settlement. I cannot tell you the amount because of the terms of that settlement. What I can tell you is that it covered Thornton's fees with significant room to spare, and that the remaining funds have been sitting in an account that I opened in my own name, at a bank where neither my stepfather nor my half-brother has ever set foot. The criminal referral for insurance fraud was separate from the civil settlement. I didn't control that process. The Bureau of Insurance made the referral, and the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office took it from there. My stepfather was charged with insurance fraud in the 1st degree and falsification of business records. He entered an Alford plea, which means he didn't formally admit guilt, but acknowledged the evidence was sufficient for a conviction. He received a suspended sentence and a fine, and was required to relinquish his ownership stake in 2 of the company's federal contracts. I am not going to tell you I feel nothing about that outcome. Some days I think he got less than he deserved. Some days I think about my mother saying it didn't matter because they were married, and I feel something that isn't quite grief and isn't quite anger. It's more like a long, slow exhale that hasn't finished yet. What I do know is this. I know that my mother built something real. She put her father's land under that company and she put her trust inside that marriage and she believed she was protected. She wasn't, not fully, but what she built didn't disappear when she died. It just got rearranged into a story that didn't include her. And what I've spent the last 2 years doing, slowly, methodically, with documents and attorneys, and a patience I didn't know I had, is correcting the record. My mother's name is not on the company letterhead. It will never be. That window closed a long time ago and I'm at peace with that. What I do have is a letter, written by Thornton, included in the settlement proceedings, that formally entered into the legal record the fact that the original land and commercial property contributed to the formation of Sterling Ridge Site Services was inherited property belonging to my mother, and that her contribution to the company's founding capital was material, documented, and uncompensated. It doesn't change what happened, but it means that somewhere in a filing in the Commonwealth of Virginia, her name is part of the record, not as a wife, as a founder. I think about that sometimes when I'm driving. I think about the way she used to cut cantaloupe in the kitchen and say things like it doesn't matter, and the law protects us, and we trust each other. And I think about how much she believed in the people she loved. And I think that the worst thing that ever happened to her is that her belief was not returned in equal measure. I didn't become someone who stopped trusting people. I want to say that clearly. I still trust my best friend who told me to call an attorney on the second ring. I trust Thornton, who sat beside me in that conference room without making me feel small. I trust the foreman who showed me the staircase that day, who later gave a voluntary statement to the investigator without anyone asking him twice. I trust the people who show up with documents, with honesty, with the willingness to say what they saw. What I stopped doing is assuming that trust travels through bloodlines automatically. The folder with my name on it is in a fireproof safe in my apartment now. I kept it because Thornton said to keep everything. I haven't opened it since the settlement. I don't need to. I know what it says. What I keep instead, in the front pocket of my daily planner, is a photograph, not the one from the plastic bag behind the water heater, though I have that one too, framed now on my bookshelf. This one is different. It's a photo of my mother standing in front of the commercial building on my grandfather's land, the one that became the first yard for the company, the one with the cracked parking lot and the old for lease sign still hanging crooked in the window. She's laughing at something off camera. Her arms are crossed. She looks like someone who knows exactly what she's standing on. I look at that photo some mornings and I think, she knew. She always knew, somewhere under all the trust and the cantaloupe and the belief in the people she loved. She knew what that land was worth. She knew what she brought to the table. She just didn't know she'd need to prove it one day. I proved it for her. That's the part I'll keep.